Namaste. Everybody okay? Not sure how you feel about things. My feeling is that we're living in somewhat unusual times. I think the older dudes will kind of nod their heads. Unusual from the point of view that it's kind of like we have an increase or a growth in materialism, but at the same time there seems to be more like awareness about spiritual things. And sometimes they are somewhat coming into conflict. If you look at what's going on in America and parts of Europe, and which will undoubtedly roll over to Australia and New Zealand, if it hasn't already. And we're seeing a growth in conflict. People in conflict with each other. And it's become really pronounced in universities, where there is a huge growth in intolerance, it's manifest by everyone, an unwillingness to engage in dialogue, and people wanting to sort of dominate the conversation. Dominating the conversation is not really the problem. It's whether you sort of do it in a civilized way or not, I think really defines what kind of people we are. And so we see that there is, on one hand, a rise in tolerance and acceptance and inclusivity, but then at the same time, a growing intolerance for those who are not on board with the program. And it's manifest in a degree of hatefulness that is sort of like, wow, I mean, quite far out, where everything becomes sort of a foundation for people to be really going off on each other and raising their voices and raising the temperature. If we look at the definition, the dictionary definition of hate, it is an intense hostility and aversion, usually derived from fear, anger, or a sense of injury. It's also defined as an extreme dislike or disgust. And synonyms for hate are to loathe, to detest, to dislike greatly, or to abhor. So, are you guys picking up on much of this or not? You know, what's really going on around the world? So, there's almost like two categories of people that become labeled as haters. One category are people that actually do express hatred. And it's usually in the form of actual racism, racial bigotry, and other types of bigotry towards other belief systems, other ideas. And people react quite often quite violently or in a very, very angry sort of manner. They really let people know how much they hate that. Then you've got a second type of person that's labeled as a hater. And it's someone that you may have an ideological difference with, or they're from a different part of the political spectrum in terms of beliefs and ideas. And if somebody belongs to that group, then I use the term hater simply as a form of manipulation to try and bludgeon somebody with a disgusting word or label to try and get them to do what I want. The problem with the second category of the use of the word hater is that it really muddies the lines between what is true and what is untrue. I mean, we're having a really increasingly hard time trying to fathom what is really the truth. And if we look and consider that human life is really meant for a spiritual quest. This is the difference between a human being and an animal, is our capacity to ask questions and to begin this quest for some real spiritual understanding, some spiritual awakening. So what happens is that when people don't really undertake a real spiritual journey, and instead they want to try and build a utopia in this world, then they will often use things that are often associated with spirituality. And one word here would be enlightened. Enlightened has different meanings, someone that is filled with wisdom and understanding is said to be enlightened. But from a spiritual perspective, it means something completely different. It means a person that has undergone great spiritual realization. So, there is this idea that if I am enlightened, I have a righteous duty to beat up the Neanderthals and the knuckle draggers. These are the people that don't embrace my political or life ideology and I don't want to use any examples because it wrecks everything. Because I'm not on either side in this sort of argument. I'm squarely situated in the middle and looking at it from a spiritual perspective, that some people that adopt sort of like certain types of eating choices. Me, I'm almost a lifelong vegetarian and often vegan. But I don't think I have the right to go around intimidating people to accept my choices in life. I think that that's wrong. I think that when people want to engage in civil discourse and actual debate, debate is where one person makes a point and the other side listens, then the other side counters with another point that should have better logic or be more acceptable. Then the audience becomes swayed there. Then the other side gets the opportunity to respond. That's civil debate and discourse. Not that we kind of shout each other down. We engage in terrorizing people or threatening people or engage in irresponsible activity to make a point. I think that the taking of any life is really, personally, I think it's abhorrent. I don't think that that's a good thing, and I don't think it's a sign of civilization or being civilized if we are callous to the death or suffering of anyone or any living being. But I don't feel, from a spiritual perspective, that we have a right to intimidate or harass others. But in the current environment, what's going on is people often feel like they have a more enlightened point of view and that they are right and the other person is wrong, feel that they have a right to label those that are not on the same team as me as being a hater. And then because of that, because I'm right and they're wrong, I'm moral and they're immoral, I have the duty to manifest my hatred towards them by really getting in their face and shouting at them and being intolerant and, all of these type of things. So people that engage and more you see this trend towards this way of conducting ourselves. But what happens when we head down that road is that instead of truly becoming more enlightened and more compassionate and more caring, it produces the opposite result. I can be deeply caring about one category of whatever, humans, animals, whatever, and I can hate another category. And I have to put it to you that this is not a sign of actual enlightenment. I mean, we have to ask the question, is hating anyone or anything the right response? Is it the right thing to do? Does it get us to the place where we want to be or where we want others to be? And the answer, of course, is no. What it does is it breeds more division, more divisiveness. It tamps down compassion. It tamps down actual caring for one another. And it makes the world in which we live more prone to violence. Now, I can feel that I'm righteous in my engagement in violence, but violence for these purposes is never good. It is never acceptable. It is never civilizing. In fact, it starts heading in the other direction. I mean, it's kind of a ludicrous situation when I categorize one group of people as being haters. and then say, because they are haters, I have the right to hate them. I thought the problem is that they're haters. So is it hating that's wrong, or is it what you are hating that's wrong? And of course the answer is both. But fundamentally, the idea of hating anyone or anything, is not good. It is not a spiritual principle. It does not lead to happiness. It does not lead to fulfillment. It doesn't lead to a more enlightened life. In fact, the opposite happens. So the reality is that hate is actually an unenlightened response. It is a non-spiritual response to someone that may be engaged in something that's quite bad. When I was thinking about this a couple of days ago, I just took a look online in relation to the term hating and seeing others as enemies. And I stumbled upon what is described as the Sermon upon the Mount. It was meant to be a very famous talk that Jesus Christ gave to an assembled group of people. And there were a couple of verses in it that were quite stunning. They were quite stunning not because they were promoting some religious ideology or principle. They were actually promoting something that is profoundly spiritual, something that is really uplifting for all people. And what was being promoted is something that's almost impossible to achieve. So it states, "You have heard that it hath been said that thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. And pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you." And I went like, wow. I mean, you know what? Maybe because I don't hang out in church, but this is something I haven't heard for like yonks. I mean, since I was a little kid, and even then it was like, you know, it didn't really register, it didn't mean anything. But when I look at this and I consider it in relation to what is spiritual truth, it instantly reminded me, there is this really famous spiritual text called the Bhagavad Purana. The Bhagavad Purana is thousands of years old. And in one part of it, it has like 18,000 verses. It's like huge. And in one part of it, there's an account of a young prince who demonstrated from his birth really unusual qualities, like really unusual. His father was an incredibly powerful king, a tremendous usurper who had gone around conquering others and inflicting violence. And I mean, he was like, this guy was far out. He was really heavy duty. And he wanted to see that his son was adequately schooled in political thinking and political science, knowing that one day he would have to rule this kingdom that he was creating, this monstrous kingdom. And he charged two young teachers who were quite clever with educating his son and other members of the princely order, young boys. So at this point, this young boy, his name was Prahlad. He was only 5 years old, 5. And the guy's studying political science. It's like, you didn't get a chance to have a happy childhood if you were in this kind of a family. You had to learn from an early age because you were going to enter the biggest snake pit imaginable, the royal court. So it states that Prahlad certainly heard and recited, because they used to have these lessons all in what's called sutra form. It's all kind of like, and you had to learn how to memorize and repeat by rote all of these. The Chinese would do this too in the Chinese courts, things that you had to learn. So he said, I've heard and recited the topics of politics and economics taught by the teachers, but he understood that political philosophy involves considering someone a friend and someone else an enemy. And thus, he did not like it. And it's like, whoa, this is really quite extraordinary that someone is already adopting this type of thinking, that if I divide people in my life into categories of friends and enemies, those that I friend and those that I unfriend, then it's not going to help me spiritually. In fact, it's going to hurt me spiritually. So in a later encounter with his father, who was threatening to actually kill him, said that he was being betrayed by his own son for turning his back on these subjects. He said to his father, "Please give up your hateful mentality. Do not discriminate in your heart between friends and enemies. Make your mind equipoised towards everyone. Except for the uncontrolled and misguided mind, there is no enemy within this world. When one sees everyone on the platform of equality, one then comes to the position of perfect spiritual vision." So this was quite an extraordinary statement for a young boy to make. And it reflects a very high spiritual principle. All of these divisions that we feel in our life, in terms of groups of people we are attracted to or like, and those we dislike based on some political ideology, something they've done to us, something they've done to a friend or whatever. These are all based on very limited thinking. You and I are eternal spiritual beings. This body in which we are currently dwelling is a temporary residence. I will be in it for some time and I will be forced to give it up. If I want to make this body the perfect dwelling for me, the perfect enjoyment machine, I will always fail in that endeavor because it's foundationally untrue. My body is not me. It doesn't matter what I do to it, how I dress it up, how I decorate it, how much stuff I stuff into my different orifices, what I grab and pull close to me. None of it penetrates my heart of hearts. None of it really touches me this spiritual being. I am eternal. This world in which we live is temporary. If I become overly absorbed in this temporary world, thinking it is everything, it cannot end any other way than in disappointment and unhappiness. It is fleeting, it is passing, it is limited in nature. And when I get overly absorbed in material identities belonging to a sexual orientation or gender, if I feel I'm belonging to a certain race just because my body, I mean, it's, you know, from a Vedic perspective, it's so ridiculous. You know, you can have two peoples at war with each other, looking across a border filled with hate. And you can die at the end of that life, you can leave that body, and by the process of reincarnation or transmigration of the soul, you can now take birth in the camp that you despised because you are constantly thinking about them. And now you hate the team that you came from because you're identifying the team that you've showed up in. This is a Vedic spiritual perspective, and it points to the folly and the stupidity of clinging to thinking that really doesn't bring us happiness, that's not based on truth and real understanding and appreciation. So this topic is actually a really big topic, and small meander through it this evening doesn't fully do it justice. But I hope that what it does is provide a little food for thought and for people to consider. You know, in life, if I want to come to the point of true happiness, true fulfillment, if I want to attain the platform of actual enlightenment, I cannot do it by clinging to material conception. It's not going to work. This world is not perfect. It will never be perfect. Should we work to try and make it function in an orderly and as pleasant as possible way? Yes, we have a civic duty to do that. We have a duty to family, to society, to try and do that. But don't get overly invested to the point that you start hating those who are different. Even if you think that you're very enlightened or your point of view is deeply enlightened, don't think that. That's not healthy. That is not good. It will not bring you to the position of happiness. It is only true spiritual enlightenment that will make it so a person can experience fulfillment and true happiness in this life. Okay? Was that all right?
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. He doesn't believe me. No, I'm joking, Dave. So we, you know, we've grown up in particular families, in this particular body, in particular societies, and a lot of the ways in which we react to things, we are conditioned to do by the groups that we associate with and by the belief systems that we adopt. And I'm not saying to, you know, walk away. What I'm saying is what we need is to have a more spiritual foundation. And this is what I'm encouraging people to consider and to try and adopt. Okay? So we are just going to chant a little bit more a real simple mantra, one that's easy for people, Om Hari Om. And actually it is this process. It's one thing to study philosophy and to try and have only a mental approach to enlightenment. What we need to do is to take ourself, the spiritual being, and the body in which we are temporarily residing, and immerse ourselves in the purifying and transcendental waters of the spiritual sound. And it is this immersion that brings about a purification of the heart and mind and makes it so that spiritual realization becomes a possibility. So one doesn't have to study any philosophy. Simply by engaging in an authentic spiritual process can bring about such transformation that there will be a spontaneous and gradual awakening of spiritual truth. And the way in which you see the world, the way in which you begin to live, actually permanently alters. So this particular form of meditation is actually highly recommended for this day and age to bring about real transformation. Thank you very much.